All right, let's talk about movie magic.
Houston, we have a problem.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
Harry Potter. It's a global phenomenon. The book series is acclaimed. It's been a huge success for decades now. And the movie series, the franchise rights, all of it, the merchandising, every facet of this franchise is just built to keep moving forward again and again. And really, the world that J.K. Rowling built is so rich and magical that it can keep expanding for years to come. Now, obviously, it started with the books, which are amazing. It has become a literary classic like The Hobbit or a book like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It has instilled wonder and awe in generations now. And 20 years ago, to this very year, the first movie, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone if you're in Europe or other countries, launched. This movie was a huge success, and quite frankly, it's aged incredibly well. And obviously, there were several films to follow, subsequently building on that first film and creating a franchise that has really withstood the test of time. We look back now and it's already been 10 years since the last mainstay Harry Potter film was released, and they hold up so well. And they are, to this day, one of the best adaptations presented of a book to a movie. But I want to take a look at the influence the directors have had on this series. So today I want to look back at the first movie and the second movie, both directed by Chris Columbus. And I want to look and say, what did Chris Columbus do with this franchise? The director's influence in one movie in particular can definitely be seen in these films, but it's such a rich world that it often goes unnoticed. So I want to talk about how Chris Columbus was the perfect choice to helm this franchise from the start, and how he created this sandbox for all these other directors to come into and play, all based on J.K. Rowling's beautiful literature in the first novels. Now, to understand how Chris Columbus built these films and how they felt so magical and perfect, you have to look at what Chris Columbus has done as a filmmaker. Chris Columbus is a writer at heart. He wrote films like Goonies and Gremlins, both of which take fantastical elements and inject it into this real world. Now, Chris Columbus, if you look back, comes from a certain school of filmmaking. It's very Spielbergian in its nature. That's Steven Spielberg. On Goonies, he got to work with Steven Spielberg as producer, but also the legendary director Richard Donner, who also took a fantastic idea in Superman and grounded in reality. This is something we have to look at very clearly with Chris Columbus as a choice for Harry Potter. What he was able to do with a lot of his films, both writing and directing, he's able to take these fantastical elements and just ground them in a reality. If you look at a film like Home Alone, even looking back at it today, it seems a little absurd. This concept of this kid, this 8-year-old child fighting off burglars, it seems crazy. He uses booby traps. He has blueprints that are insane. This is a psychopath. But somehow Chris Columbus is able to ground this concept of this 8-year-old child fighting off burglars and creating booby traps, much like something you'd see in Saw years later, except for non-lethal. Ouch. And not only does he make that feel real and something plausible that we can all enjoy, but somehow he gets this magical wonder. A lot of weight is carried by his score from John Williams, who he would get to come back for Harry Potter. And he also gets one of the best child performances ever put on film from Macaulay Culkin. These are all little pieces to the puzzle of what Chris Columbus was able to do with Harry Potter. He went and he found brilliant child actors who could grow into this franchise, and he was able to direct them into believable performances. And he took this idea of this magical world and was able to ground it. And honestly, when you look at his Hogwarts and the world surrounding that, the wizarding world, it feels out of time, which is something that he tries to bring to other films. Obviously, he has films like Miss Doubtfire and 9 Months, and even both Home Alones that are very 90s in their execution. They feel like they're set in the 90s. But when you watch them, you're not drawn out of it thinking, wow, this was the 90s. It's not something that's a period piece in that sense. It's universal. And he brought that feeling to Harry Potter as well. He knew that the world he had to work with, written by J.K. Rowling, was rich. And that if he can get you to believe in it, if he can get you to understand that this is a plausible reality, that you would be invested immediately in these children and their adventures. Another thing that he did very well, and has done very well in most of his work, is he surrounded the children with this brilliant cast of British actors. This is something that other directors would also get to do, but it was his film that brought in the likes of Alan Rickman and Maggie Smith and someone like Robbie Coltrane. At one point it was supposed to be Robin Williams, which would have been interesting considering they've worked with each other before, but he was able to go around the mandate of British actors being required for the roles that was put in place and find the best actors that could help elevate the performance of these young children. And let's face it, he nailed the casting of the children as well, and it shows. He really knows how to get great performances out of kids, and he knows how to pull that off before he even rolls by making the right casting choices. The thing about Chris Columbus and his view of Harry Potter is he's not necessarily the biggest, flashiest visual director, but he knows how to build that world and really create just magic on screen. I said earlier he's Spielbergian, and that's because what he does is he creates this atmosphere, this hopeful feeling in basically all of his films before and even after doing Harry Potter. His first venture into filmmaking was Adventures in Babysitting, which, if you've never seen, it's terrific. It is this magnificent adventure that follows Elizabeth Shue's character during a night of debauchery as she's trying to wrangle the kids. And there's even a reference to Thor, the god of thunder, not necessarily the Marvel one, but still.
Thor.
Somehow it all works. It all fits in there. And that's what he really brought to this franchise. Visually, the world was already in place. The set design, the costuming, everything was perfect with it. And he didn't do anything flashy with cinematography and things like that. And honestly, the first 2 books don't call for too much of it. The biggest thing is there were a lot of attempts at newer technology like CGI that he did try to push the limits of, and sometimes it didn't work quite as well. Considering he shot Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets back to back, it feels sometimes like Sorcerer's Stone's CGI and stuff was maybe rushed a little bit, the troll scene in particular. But it has a classic Hollywood feel throughout, because that is how he is as a filmmaker. And honestly, I think having a director like him in place made these films feel like classics before a franchise even started going. I remember sitting in the theater and watching both of these films when they came out 20 years ago. But you never once thought, oh man, I hope I get to see the rest of this book series play out, because it already felt like it was gonna be a classic. This thing was huge. It naturally saw comparisons to Lord of the Rings at the time because they were both coming out around the same time. And they both felt really like they were going to stand the test of time no matter what. And Chris Columbus has a lot to do with that. The thing about these first 2 movies is they're not flashy. Much like the books that these 2 first films are based on, it's not the flashiest of the stories, but it really sets the ground floor for where the story can go. And there's not a lot of progress from the first movie to the second as far as the stakes being raised, but there's enough. At the end of the day, on most people's lists, Chamber of Secrets and Sorcerer's Stone end up ranking lower on their Harry Potter films. But the truth is, like a lot of films that get something started, they're not always the most exciting, but they establish what we're in store for. And really, Chris Columbus building such a solid world and doing such a great job with casting and creating this tone that is light and playful, but also has little hints of darkness throughout. It really allowed the filmmakers that would come to elaborate more and more on the story elements and really build on the richness of what he put on film. And he did that because Chris Columbus is a brilliant storyteller. First and foremost, that's what he does. As I said earlier, he's not flashy with the cinematography. There's some beautiful camera work and visuals in both of his Harry Potter films, but nothing quite as memorable as what we'll see in the next film. However, he established everything that allowed those new visuals that would come later on to happen. He went and he made beautiful choices with casting. He went and he decided on how Hogwarts would look and feel. And really, he made two of the most faithful adaptations of the whole series. They even had Peeves the Poltergeist at one point and cut him from the film. And it's easy to see why they picked Chris Columbus, because of the filmmakers he worked with in the past and his filmography. He was able to make great family films that also tackled some serious subject matter. A film like Mrs. Doubtfire deals with divorce, and it's not an easy thing to talk about. That's one of the first films I've ever watched that dealt with divorce, and it's different. It's a different take that you wouldn't necessarily see, but also it makes you laugh like crazy. And that's partially because Robin Williams is a comedic genius, but also because Chris Columbus knew how to create the atmosphere to not only make you laugh, but make you cry in that film. And then of course a film like Goonies he may have written, but you can tell he created that world, which made him perfect to go ahead and work in a fantastical world like Hogwarts. And of course, the Home Alone series, even though they get terribly violent and I think Kevin's a murderer. But somehow, with all of that, there's a magical performance from Macaulay Culkin which has lasted and stood the test of time for decades now. And there's also this wondrous feeling. It obviously feels so Christmas, but a lot of that has to do with these magical moments that Chris Columbus made sure were played perfectly in the film. And that score, you cannot discount John Williams, who he'll come back for one more Harry Potter film after these two, but bring him on board, knowing that when I work with John Williams, I get this magical feeling, and that's what I need for this film. Chris Columbus did that. So really, when you look at these films and his influence on Harry Potter, it's easy to see where he comes in. A lot of people like to go ahead and attest the success of all the Harry Potter stuff to J.K. Rowling. It's obviously not true. There's a great team of filmmakers, from the producers to the actors, and obviously anyone that worked on the crew for these films, but especially the directors. This isn't a paint by numbers. And Chris Columbus, he was the first one to make those master strokes, to create a beautiful work of art. And it really goes without saying that even though the first two films are understated as far as how magically creative they get and how rich the story gets, they are the perfect jumping off point. And it's really very clear that Chris Columbus was a perfect fit as director for this. At one point, they were supposed to merge the first two books into one movie. When Steven Spielberg was possibly going to direct it, they wanted that, and they wanted like Haley Joel Osment to be Harry, things like that. But somewhere along the way, whether it was Chris Columbus, the producers, or J.K. Rowling just fighting for it, they decided to do both. And I think when they chose Chris Columbus, they knew this guy understands how to adapt this material and how to make these first two movies extremely memorable and classic from the start. That would probably explain why he got hired to do Percy Jackson, but we don't talk about that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the first two Harry Potter films directed by Chris Columbus, and understanding who he is as a filmmaker. He's just one of those guys that came up through the 80s and 90s that you can recognize his films almost instantly. I don't know if he's quite as recognizable as the people he's worked with, especially on some of his most classic films, but when you watch his work, you really feel something magical about it. And I think that's clearly the right choice for those first Harry Potter films. You really wanted to hit that feeling of, this is our real world, and there's this magical thing happening in it. This is the first in the series I'm going to be doing about the directors of Harry Potter, so please make sure you don't miss any of them. So subscribe, click a like, and turn on those notifications. I'm a newer channel, and all the support I can get is Always appreciated. So until next time, I'm Alex, and it's been fun talking movies with you.